and thank you for joining us again at Voice of Rohingya Radio, a registered non-profit coming to you from the state of Oregon in the United States of America. I would like to thank all of our listeners who allow this program to continue to provide the latest news through our exclusive interviews, reports from inside the border, and reputable sources from around the world. If you would like to stay up to date with our program, you can view or download all of our broadcasts online at youtube.com/VOR radio, or you can join our Facebook page to find information on past and future programs. It is June 1st, 2014. For Voice of Rohingya Radio, I am your host, Zach Taylor. Our top story tonight comes after tensions flared over the weekend between Bangladesh and Myanmar's border forces. Tensions have been brewing along the Bangladesh-Myanmar border since Wednesday night when Myanmar's Border Guard Police reportedly opened fire at Border Guard Bangladesh, or BGB, patrol teams at a Rohingya refugee camp near the border. After the gun battle that ensued, which reportedly began from the Myanmar side of the border without provocation, one Bangladeshi officer was reported missing. Myanmar remained silent on the issue until pressured by the foreign ministry, who summoned Myanmar's ambassador in Dhaka to protest, eventually settling on a handoff of the unidentified body to the Bangladeshi side on Friday. Colonel Saiful Islam, BGB sector commander, said Myanmar's border guard police, quote, had sent a special message inviting us to come to the border demarcation pillar number 52 to receive the body. When our personnel reached the spot around 3:10 p.m., BGP men started firing indiscriminately without provocation. The body that has now been identified as the missing Bangladeshi is still in the custody of Myanmar's border forces as of yesterday. Though the BGB colonel said that things were calm at the moment, tensions are still running high at the border, and both sides have amped up their forces in the region. In a related story, the Rohingya blogger also reported that 10 Rohingya men were captured from a village in Maungda Township and are being forced to serve as porters for the Myanmar border force. The Myanmar government has also reportedly been propagating that the armed conflict is between a Rohingya armed group and Myanmar Border Guard police. It is a serious human rights violation against Rohingyas, as these innocent people will be used as porters in the front line where armed conflict is taking place. As of Friday, the Rohingya men taken had not come back home, and their families are worried about their lives. In other news, Burma campaign officials have officially warned opposition leader and National League for Democracy chairperson Aung San Suu Kyi for what they say was a statement challenging the Myanmar army. The letter sent to Suu Kyi, dated May 22nd, referred to a quote made by her where she said that she wanted to challenge the military police to support amendments to the 2008 Constitution, which currently requires 25% of parliamentary seats to be filled by unelected army officials, guaranteeing the military a place in Myanmar's politics. The inflammatory passage of her speech, delivered in Mandalay during a rally on the 18th, urged the military police to prove that their decisions are not based on the desire for authority, power, and special opportunity. The legal framework working against Suu Kyi is an oath she undertook during her entry into Parliament, which requires its jointees to, quote, uphold and abide by the Constitution and respect the Constitution and its existing laws. Rallies are taking place across the country with the aim of demonstrating public support for amending the Charter. The 88 Generations, an NLD-led campaign, has agreed to first focus on challenging Article 436, the Irrawaddy reports, which demands that 3/4 of the parliament approve of constitutional amendments. During the Mandalay rally, Suu Kyi said that the current constitution is not democratic because it grants the military special powers. Suu Kyi told the crowd in Burma's second-largest city, I want to challenge military officials to amend the constitution within this year, from within the boundaries of the law and via the parliament. If they truly love the country, respect the citizens, then think of the future of the country and be brave enough. The United Nations Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in Myanmar, Tomas Quintana, called on the government and people of Myanmar to build on the many achievements of the last 3 years in laying a solid foundation for robust democracy in a letter published Friday. Mr. Quintana completes his 6-year term as the Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in Myanmar at the end of this month. His successor, Ms. Lee of Korea, will take up the position as of June. Quintana defined 4 areas of his focus on Myanmar, including the establishment of the rule of law and the institution of an impartial and independent judiciary, constitutional and legislative reform, reform of the armed forces, and the progressive release of political prisoners. Though he cited significant improvements in regards to political prisoners, Myanmar having released over 1,100, He maintained that no one has yet been made accountable for the mob attacks against INGOs in Sittwe in March this year, and although some organizations have been allowed to return, the humanitarian situation remains dire, especially for the Muslim communities in Rakhine, which rely most on the services delivered by the INGOs. The letter added that local Rohingya leaders and 3 INGO humanitarian workers continue to be in detention, and others face intimidation and harassment by local groups in the provision of health care to the Muslim communities, worsening their limited access to medical aid. He also mentioned reports of deaths, in particular of women and children, caused by preventable, chronic, or pregnancy-related conditions, which could have been avoided had adequate and timely medical services been provided. He said this situation, as well as the recent denial of self-identification during the census process, is reflective of the wider and systematic discrimination against and marginalization of the Rohingya community. Quintana warned, as in his last report to the UN Human Rights Council, that the pattern of widespread and systematic human rights violations in Rakhine State may constitute crimes against humanity as defined under the Rome Statute of International Criminal Court. He closed the letter by wishing his successor success. You were listening to Voice of Rohingya Radio. Thanks again for listening to Voice of Rohingya Radio, a registered non-profit coming to you from Oregon in the United States of America. I am your host, Zach Taylor. Nicholas Kristof of the New York Times offered an indictment of U.S. President Barack Obama's foreign relations with Myanmar in an article published on Wednesday. Kristof, who is in Myanmar traveling through villages and speaking with locals, defined the issues facing Rohingya, such as health concerns and ethnic cleansing, but wrote that what is particularly odious is that the suffering is deliberately inflicted as government policy. The authorities are stripping members of one ethnic group of citizenship, then interning them in camps or villages, depriving them of education, refusing them medical care, and even expelling humanitarians who seek to save their lives. Kristof pointed out that as a fervent denouncer of apartheid South Africa during his college years, Obama should use his considerable clout in the developing nation to help end the apartheid-like conditions in Myanmar, where not even basic medical help is available for the minority Muslims. Kristof ended with a plea to Obama to, quote, find his voice. Aid groups working in Myanmar are soon to come under even closer scrutiny as 20 Arakanese Buddhist civil society groups from 17 townships in Arakan State announced on Sunday that they have set up a UN INGO watch team that will monitor international aid operations for the Rohingya Muslim minority in the state. The move is taken as a further sign that Arakanese nationalist groups are trying to exert a degree of control over operations by the United Nations and international aid groups, which have resumed in Arakan State in the past month. An Arakanese women's rights activist said the team will investigate INGO operations and will approach them if they find that local people do not like what they are doing, and the watch team will inform the aid groups about it. Pierre Perron, a spokesperson for the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, welcomed, quote, any individual or group which seeks to improve the delivery of humanitarian and development assistance to all needy communities. Despite the fact that it's been difficult enough for the barely half of the humanitarian workers originally working in the area to return after riots in March, there are even more restrictions now. Aid groups are reportedly now also required to seek prior approval of local Arakan State authorities before they can carry out operations in an area. And DVB reported that Arakanese leaders recently sought to block the planned construction of an emergency hospital for displaced Rohingya Muslims near Sittwe. Rohingya activist Ong Win said that the number of aid workers is so low that he's not seen any foreign aid on the ground since March. A new anti-hate speech campaign is gaining momentum in Mandalay, where about 25 volunteers handed out pamphlets. The Flower Speech campaign encourages people to refrain from hate speech and more carefully consider the consequences of their actions. It was launched in Rangoon in April by a prominent blogger. The reason we are doing this is so that we do not have unnecessary problems because of offensive language while we are transitioning into a democratic country, said a volunteer. The leaflets describe hate speech as an unfortunate byproduct of freedom of speech that has had a visible impact on Myanmar and its society. If hate speech reaches a dangerous level, we are seriously worried that it would create a big obstacle on the road forward for our country. The pamphlet distribution has been conducted 6 times in Yangon and Mandalay. While it was initially prohibited by authorities, activists have been able to operate more freely recently. They now plan to expand it to other parts of Upper Myanmar. Our message to all citizens, including parliamentary representatives and government officials, the volunteer elaborated, is, please watch your tongue. Human Rights Watch expressed its desire for Burmese parliament to scrap a new law being drafted on grounds that it would encourage further oppression and violence against Muslims and other religious minorities. Burma's government is stoking communal tensions by considering a draft law that will politicize religion and permit government intrusion on decisions of faith, said Brad Adams, Asia director. Following more than 2 years of anti-Muslim violence, this law would put Muslims and other religious minorities in even more of a precarious situation. Under the draft law, any Burmese citizen who plans to change religion must seek a series of permissions from local representatives of government departments, including the Ministry of Religion, Education, Immigration and Population, and Women's Affairs, and wait 90 days for permission to be granted. Penalties for failing to obtain government permission to change one's religion are not stated. Proselytizing, forcing someone to convert, or insulting another religion would become punishable by up to 1 year in prison. If enacted, the bill would violate Burma's obligations to uphold the rights to freedom of religion, conscience, and expression under international law. The proposed restrictions on conversion, proselytizing, and speech contravene the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The Ministry of Religious Affairs drafted the law as part of a series of 4 laws related to marriage, religion, polygamy, and family planning proposed by a Buddhist organization called the Association for the Protection of Race and Religion, which is connected to the nationalist Buddhist monk movement, also known as 969. Nationalist monks have exerted increasing influence in Burmese public life since the political reform process started and have targeted Muslim communities and international Muslim organizations, such as the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Adams said, international donors, investors, and governments need to vocally oppose this law and other laws and policies that could result in long-term religious discrimination in Burma. I'd like to thank you again for tuning in today to Voice of Rohingya Radio. As always, you can view and download our broadcasts at youtube.com/VORradio, and you can join our Facebook page for more information on the program. I'd like to close today with a quote from the late world leader Winston Churchill, who said, "You have enemies? Good. That means you've stood up for something in your life." Though it seems extremists and forces of the Myanmar government would rather see Rohingya quietly disappear from the fields they've tended for hundreds of years, though they'd rather see ancient religious monuments of Rohingya ancestors be razed or burnt, though they'd rather see the Rohingya escape their oppressive thumb to some unwelcoming distant country or perhaps even drown on the way, I greatly admire those who, broken-boned and underfed, might not be able to stand, but still stand up for their homes, their families, their religion, and most importantly, their rights. For Voice of Rohingya Radio, this is Zach Taylor, signing out.